Hello there, and welcome to webinar 2 in the Design Cluster series. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you have been enjoying the webinar so far. This is a second webinar in the Design Cluster series, and in total there will be 3 webinars that are going to walk you through the Design Cluster in terms of the knowledge that you would need and really help you understand the fundamentals of designing a course in the vet sector. Okay, so this webinar is going to touch a little bit on the documents that you might need or that you're going to come across in an RTO. It's going to give you a little bit more practice and understanding with training.gov.au, and we're going to touch on the standards for RTO operations as well. So you definitely need to be aware of those. Okay, so let's jump right into it. Okay, so as always, tips are getting the most out of this webinar. Have a notepad available. Be taking lots of notes, because the more notes that you take, the easier it'll be for things to be understandable, and the faster you'll be able to apply the knowledge to your assessments. Be prepared to do the activities as we go along, and have a screen open where you're actually doing the activities as we go through. Okay, have a do not disturb sign on your desk, and make sure that you are dedicating this time to you and fully absorbing as much as you can. As we all know, it's easy for things to become distracting in life and for things to get in the way of us truly being present. So use this as an opportunity to really indulge in your own time and your own focus and get the most out of the webinar. Okay, so let's get straight into it. Terminology in vet. In relation to documents. Okay, so there's a number of documents that you're going to come across in the vet sector, and I want to break those down for you. Okay, so the first document that you might come across is called a TAS. It's called a TAS. All right, a training and assessment strategy. A training and assessment strategy. Now, this document is basically the plan on how an entire qualification will be delivered. So when will we use this document? Well, we need to fill out a TAS when we are submitting an application to ASQA in order to teach that qualification as part of our RTO. Okay. Also, we're going to create a TAS so that the trainers know how it's going to be done, so the assessors know how it's going to be done. We know how long the course is going to take, what resources are going to be required, and basically it's a template, and it's got a number of boxes that we will fill out, and any time that we make modifications to how the course is run, we certainly want to make changes to the TAS, but also we want to make sure that there is an existing TAS for each cohort that we may train. So maybe you have a group of maybe younger students and that are brand new to the industry. Maybe you have a group of students that are quite experienced in the industry. Maybe you have a corporate group that you're teaching. And each of these different groups, you would create a TAS for them, because how they go about the course could be slightly different. Okay, so I'll show you an example of a TAS soon in this webinar. But I just need you to be aware that a training assessment strategy is a plan on how an entire qualification is going to be delivered. Next, we have a learning program plan. A learning program plan. Now, that is a plan on how 2 or 3 units will be delivered from the training assessment strategy. Okay, so you may have multiple learning program plans. Okay, now, a session plan is going to be a segment of the unit itself. So for example, in one session, a session plan may talk about how maybe 2 or 3 elements from a unit of competency are going to be taught. The session plan is typically going to last for maybe 1 hour. Maybe you're going to have 2 session plans for a workshop. Maybe you're going to have a session plan that covers the entire day. It's totally up to you as to how you structure that. However, the big overarching document is the training assessment strategy. Then you break that down. You've got a learning program plan. Then you've got a session plan. Okay, and a session plan, obviously, relates back to the unit of competency. Okay, so hopefully that has made sense for you. Now, an example TAS is located in your assessment, okay, and let's quickly run over what the TAS looks like in your assessment. Okay, so this is an example TAS or training assessment strategy. Okay, now you are going to find such a variety of different templates out there online, and different RTOs sort of create their own templates as to what works for them. However, the fundamentals of what needs to be included in the TAS don't change. Okay, so let's take a look at it. RTO, well, obviously you would put in the name of the RTO. Okay, provider number. Every RTO has its own provider number that's issued by the regulator, well, the national regulator, ASPA. Okay, qualification code and title. Well, that would be, for example, let's say BSB. Let's go BSB 3115, the certificate 3 in business admin. Okay, I'm not exactly sure if that code is correct, but that would be an example of something we would put in there. Okay, now training package code, we will put in BSB, version number could be 3, 4, whatever it's up to, and release date maybe 2015. But that information you would get from training.gov.au. Okay. Now, target group. This is where you're going to describe the target group in as much detail as you can. So this would be the age groups, the previous education experience, why they're undertaking the course, any LLM challenges that they may have, or any current work that they're undertaking or previous work that they've undertaken. You just really want to put in a good learning profile about the learners. Okay. Now, learning needs is what areas of study and what areas do they need to work on, why are they being trained, what are they being trained for. It could be communication skills, it could be admin skills, it could be anything that relates to their future work or even current work. Okay. Entry requirements. So this could be things like a prerequisite for the course, or maybe entry requirements could relate to language literacy and numeracy skills. It could also relate to that maybe they need to have been working in a particular industry for 2 or 3 years. Maybe they need to be a particular age group. Okay. So what you write is going to be whatever's appropriate for your scenario. However, I will say at this point, in a TAS, you can never, ever write nil or NA. You always have to put in a explanation for what you put. Okay, so you need to be very careful to always avoid putting nil or NA. It's just not acceptable in ASQA's eyes. Co-requisites would be, for example, if a unit needs to be done at the same time as another unit. Okay, rare, but it does happen. Okay, so just to retouch on prerequisites, you may find, for example, with the WHS area of study, somebody has to have completed their certificate 4 in WHS before they can start their diploma of WHS. Okay, so there's a number of qualifications out there that do have prerequisites. Okay, RPL, CT. RPL stands for Recognition of Prior Learning, and CT stands for Credit Transfer. So in here we might put in a statement such as a student may be able to apply for RPL in the case that they have the following background, and the process for RPL will be the following, and you would step it out. Okay, credit transfer is basically when somebody can provide a certificate to us to show that they've already completed the unit or one of the units in a different qualification. In that case, obviously they wouldn't need to do the unit again. They would get what's called credit transfer for that unit, and it would be automatically given to them on the submission of a statement of attainment or certificate. Okay, that's the other word for it. So here we're going to write down the unit that we are actually going to deliver in the course. So obviously we're going to have the unit code, then the unit name, and we would take this from what's called the packaging rules, okay? And we're going to list them all out, okay? Outcome and exit points. Well, this would be, for example, if somebody didn't complete the course, but they maybe finished like 4 or 5 units, we would want to put in here an explanation saying that for whatever units they do complete, they will get a statement of attainment. Okay. Okay, outline a program. This would be, for example, the key overall, I guess, schedule or structure that's going to be delivered in. Okay. Then in here, we're going to make sure that we calculate our amount of training and volume of learning correctly. Okay. And we need to, for example, if it was a 3 course, we need to look up the volume of learning required hours for that, a Cert 4, and maybe diploma, we need to work out what would be the required hours for that level in that qualification. And here we can put in our numbers. Okay, and as you can see here, for a Cert 4, it requires 2,400 hours, or a range between. Okay, so you need to be able to show in your course what's going to make it up and what are the number of hours that a student is going to do in the different styles of study. Okay, schedule for classroom delivery and assessment. Well, here we could write in, for example, January, and we put in the dates. February, put in the dates. March, we put in the dates. And you can put in what would happen on those days. So maybe January 13, face-to-face workshop. Between the 20th and 25th, maybe it's going to be online study, or whatever it might be. All right. Pre and post course requirements. So you may say pre-course, the students will need to look up XYZ documents. They'll need to read through particular tasks and complete the tasks. Okay, and you can list out what's going to be required for them to do before they come along to the course. Following the course, what's going to be required for them to do? Maybe there's going to be projects for them to do. Maybe they need to do some online learning. Okay, so you would list that out there. Facilities, equipment, training, assessment, resources. Well, depending on the industry that you're working in, obviously this is going to change. So for example, if you were working in hospitality or teaching hospitality, you would want to make sure that the students had access to real life scenarios. That maybe they have access to a coffee shop. Facilities and equipment, maybe they need access to a coffee machine. Maybe they need access to coffee beans. Okay, maybe they need access to safety equipment, PPE, all these different things. Okay, if it was an office environment, maybe they need access to a photocopier, a printer, a laptop computer, all right, and certain software. So you would need to list all of that out. Like, let's go first aid for a second. So maybe if they were doing first aid training, you would need to list in here all the equipment that they would need to have access to in order to practice their first aid skills. So they would need access to bandages, to mannequins, to what else have we got? Needles, so practice needles. They would need access to certain types of splints. All these different things that whatever they would need to practice, well, you need to list out the resources that would be required for that. Now, some examples of documentary evidence. Let's say that let's still focus on the first aid for a second. Maybe you would need a completed observation checklist. Maybe you would need a video recording of them completing certain tasks. Maybe you would need some photographs of something. Maybe you would need a completed written test, okay? Let's say that you are teaching a business course, okay? And one of the units that you're teaching is creating text documents. Okay, so some examples of evidence could be finalized text documents, or it could be graphically designed documents. Or let's go with the fact that you might be teaching making a presentation. So some examples of evidence for that, you may need copies of PowerPoint presentations. You may need an example of a video recording of the student actually doing the presentation. Okay, So that's what you'll put in there. What, after you look at every single unit, what are some documentary evidence you would expect to see from the students once they completed that unit, okay, or as part of assessment? Okay, coming down here, you would again list the code of the unit name, put that in. And then you are going to tick pre-course, classroom, post-course, work-based tasks, okay. Now assessment, again you would put in the code, unit name, and you would tick the box as to how you're going to assess the learners. Okay. Then we've got a little bit about the assessment validation process, and that is basically quality assurance for assessment. Okay. Now there are standards, there's expectations for validation, and we'll cover that in the validation cluster as we go through assessment in a little bit more detail, but ultimately there is a schedule and there is a frequency on how often you are expected to sit down and review your assessments. And obviously, the more often you are checking your assessments, the better. And you're checking to make sure the assessments correlate to the units of competency and that the assessments are being marked correctly. Okay, so scrolling through that. Okay. Moderation and validation, great. So learner feedback, this is where you will put in how are you going to gather learner feedback. Training assessment staff, who's going to be involved in the training and assessment. TAS monitoring and continual improvement, how is that going to happen? Okay. Approval, who's going to approve it. Date reviewed and date for future review. Okay. And there are certainly other things that you're going to find in a TAS as well, such as industry engagement. How's that happening? When did it happen last? And the record of industry engagement. Also, you want to attach details about the trainers, their qualifications, and their regular professional development they may be undertaking as well. Okay, so also, you would want to include the language literacy and numeracy expectations for your learners and levels of support, how you're going to support those learners, all those different things. So ultimately, though, with a TAS, I can't show you every single version of it. I can't tell you exactly what to put in every single box. As you get more and more exposure to the vet sector, you're going to come across variations of a TAS. However, basically, as I said, it's a plan on how the course is going to be run, and you can certainly read up with ASQA on the different types of things they expect you to put in the TAS, and certainly check out companies like VELG, V-E-L-G, that have great templates available for writing these documents up. Okay, so coming back to the PowerPoints for a second, we have, as we talked about before, units of competency. Now, I did briefly show you a unit of competency on the previous webinar, and this time, I'd like to quickly run you through another unit of competency called organized meetings, because the more you get exposed to units of competency, the more you feel familiar and comfortable with what you're actually trying to achieve in training and assessing people. So we've got the unit organized meetings. All right, now we can make a strong strategic guess and say that this unit comes from a certificate 4 level, because we got the level, we got the unit, we got the number 4 here, which tells us that high probability it's going to relate to certificate 4. Okay, we've got BSB, which tells us it's from the business training package. ATM, probably we can infer that that relates to admin. Okay. Now, like last time, I told you the different aspects of a unit of competency. Okay. However, now let's look at the real thing. Alrighty, so now let's take a look at training.gov.au. Okay, and I'm just going to type in the word meetings. Okay, because that's going to help us find the unit. And we have 24 units related to the word meetings. Okay, so I found the one I want. It's just down here, so I'm going to click on the blue writing. Okay, now we've got the unit organized meetings. We've got the title up here. I'm going to scroll down. Now this unit can be used in multiple training packages. Okay, and it can be also used in multiple qualifications. Okay, so if we scroll down, this unit has 3 elements. We've got make meeting arrangements, prepare and distribute documentation for meetings, record and produce minutes of meeting. Okay, so that's the elements, that's the steps. Now, a performance criteria tells us the steps and the expectations on how we do the task of organizing a meeting. Okay, so this is really helpful and handy, and this is essentially what we would train somebody how to do. So when we're training someone, we need to look at the performance criteria. And we also need to make sure we look at the knowledge evidence as well, okay, because that's going to give us a strong indication of the knowledge that people are going to need when they come to do their assessment. Okay. Now, the performance evidence, as I've said previously, is about what do we need to see the learner do so that we can be 100% confident that this person is competent. Okay, so if we were planning this unit and how we would teach it, we would look here and see, all right, well, how many sessions would it take? What are some activities that we could throw in? And we would build out our session plans from there. Okay. And later on, when we come to our assessing, we would definitely take a look at performance evidence and think, okay, well, what would be the best way to assess somebody organizing a meeting? And we can certainly look and talk about strategies on how to do that when we come to the assessment. I don't want to overload you with information just yet. Okay, so hopefully the nature and structure of a unit of competency is starting to make sense to you. Okay. However, I highly encourage you to look at multiple different units and just get familiar with the structure of a unit, how it all comes together. Okay, so that is that. Alrighty, excuse me for that slight technical error there. So let's find a unit on the following topics. Okay, now what I want to do is give us some practice on actually finding a unit of competency related to different areas. Okay, and the more that you get involved in this activity, the more you're going to build up your confidence in using training.gov.au. Okay, so I've just put this up. So just take notes and write down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the 5 topics, and just so that you can play along at home. Okay. Alrighty, so if we are looking for a unit of competency in relation to a car mechanic, okay, well, what we could do is we could certainly type in car, okay, and we could see what comes up. Okay, and we've got a number of different units that relate to the word car or include the word car in it. However, I know that that's going to be rather limiting in our search, so I'm also going to try automotive and see what comes up. Okay, and units of competency. Okay, now, when I actually type in the word automotive, you can see that there is a lot more words that relate to being a car mechanic. Okay, and it's actually, let's see, it's actually 83. Okay, cool. There we go. Interpret and apply automotive repair instructions. Okay, install automotive security systems. Lots of different ones there. Let's see what happens when I type in the word mechanic. Okay, mechanic. Well, let's see on that one. Qualifications. All right. As you can see there, there's not that much in relation to being a car mechanic. In this case, we've got engineering and air conditioning, okay? So, as I've said, and just to prove the point there, you need to be really flexible with your keyword searches. Okay, the next one that we had there on our list was a truck driver. So I'm going to type in the word truck and see what comes up. And hopefully you are playing along at home. All right, so we certainly have words that relate to truck and trucking and, okay, so these don't really relate to driving a truck. So I'm going to experiment with something. I'm going to type that in, and you can hopefully see the hack that I've just done there. Okay, so I typed in truck driver or truck driving, and then I put training.gov.au. Okay, and it's going to give you a much wider search, and Google is a very powerful search engine. So when I type that in, it actually showed me the Cert 3 in driving operations. All right, so if we look down here, this one has 18 units in total, 6 core, and yeah, it's a quite complicated packaging rules there. There you go, read through that and you'll be good to go. All right, so I won't bother explaining that because it'll take a little bit of time. All right, now let's take a look at our next one. We've got coffee making. So I'm going to type in the word coffee and see what comes up. Okay, so when you look at the word coffee, we've got prepare and serve espresso coffee, plan and monitor espresso coffee service, manufacture, roast and ground coffee. So just for the sake of it, I'm going to click on that one. All right, I'm going to take a look. How many elements does this unit have? Well, it's actually got 7 elements, okay? So yeah, if you've got time, you may want to read through that and how to make a cup of coffee there. Okay, and performance evidence for making a cup of coffee, knowledge evidence, quite a lot there. Assessment conditions. Okay, cool. All right, so we didn't have any problems at all finding one that's related to coffee making. Now, next one that we had there was teamwork. As I said, hopefully you are playing along at home. So when it comes to teamwork, I'm just going to type in the word team and see what comes up. Okay, so units competency related to teamwork. Okay, we got communicate as part of a work team, for sure, for sure. Contribute to team effectiveness, another great one that we could look at there, for sure. Okay, so certainly one's on that. And then let's take a look at the last one there, which was budget. And let's see what comes up in relation to budgets and budgeting. Okay, so 12 units. We've got developer manager budget. Okay, so hopefully you get the picture now on the different strategies that we can use to find a unit of competency. Okay, so as part of your assessment for your TA, you will certainly be required. You'll be required to find units of competency and be able to write in the code and title and certainly understand the different aspects of a unit. Okay, so terminology in VET. So we've got a number of different, I guess, terms that we use that you need to get comfortable with. So the first one there is T&A. Now T&A stands for training and assessment. Now, and then we've got RPL, which is recognition of prior learning or recognized prior learning. And then we've got credit transfer, or another word for that is RCC. And RCC is recognition of current competency. Credit transfer is the more common one that you're going to come across. Now, credit transfer is basically, as I explained earlier, is if, for example, you are doing your TAE, and in a previous qualification, maybe by chance, you actually did one of the electives in another course, just by chance, you could actually come to us and show us a statement of attainment or your certificate that has that unit listed on it. And you could show that to us and you wouldn't need to complete that unit again, and you would automatically get credit transfer for it, okay? Having said that, it would have to be exactly the same unit, okay? And let's say in hospitality, maybe you studied a unit with another RTO, and then you stopped your course with that RTO and then you joined a different RTO, continued your study, well, you would be able to show them what you have studied up till that point, and you would show them the statement of attainment, and you would get credit transfer for the completed units that you have. Okay, hopefully that's made sense. Terminology in VET, all right, so training assessment, first you are trained, then you are assessed, okay? In the aspect of RPL, that's different, okay? RPL, basically, that is when you go to the RTO or go to the assessor and say, I believe I already have the skills and knowledge, and here is my evidence to prove it. Okay. Many times people try and opt for RPL because there is a belief that it's easier, but it's actually often not, because you do need to find evidence that is 100% valid and relates to the unit requirements. Okay. There's two types of RPL. It's wild RPL and competency conversations. Okay. So basically, wild RPL is where you gather up all of your evidence and you call up the RTO and say, look, I believe I'm eligible for this RPL, and here is my evidence. Okay. Then you have a competence, or the other type is a competency conversation style, where a candidate will fill out a self-assessment. They'll send in the resume and self-assessment to the RTO. If the candidate is deemed suitable for RPL, the RTO will contact them, the student will enroll and pay, and then an interview is set up called a competency conversation, and then finally the candidate attends the interview and then gathers their evidence, and then the assessor will mark off their evidence if the evidence is appropriate. Okay, so hopefully that's made sense. All right, the more you work in the industry, the more you'll get to know RPL, and different RTOs will use a slightly different structure and system for RPL. Okay, now standards for RTOs. Okay, with RTOs, they are all governed by standards. Now in Victoria and WA, they do operate off different standards to the other states, okay? But generally they are the same, but just different written format, okay? In 2015, these standards came out, okay? Previously, there were 23 standards. Now there are 8 standards. Okay, it doesn't mean that there's less complexity. It just means that they've been written in a different way and they've been summarized differently. Okay, so we've got 8 standards here. We've got standard 1 is about training assessment. Standard 2 is about quality control and quality assurance. Standard 3 is issuing of certificates. Standard 4 is accuracy of marketing. Standard 5 is learners' rights and consumer protection. Standard 6 is complaints handling. Standard 7 is financial viability of the RTO. And Standard 8 is the RTO cooperates with the regulator at all times. Okay, so here's a little bit more detail. Okay. So for example, standard 1 is about the training, okay? And ultimately, standard 1 is about, is the RTO training and assessing in alignment with the training package and how it is actually stipulated in the units of competency, okay? So this is where you need to make sure that your TAS, training assessment strategy, is up to date. You need to make sure that it is fully complete. You need to make sure that there is support for your learners, and you need to make sure that assessments are taking place in a compliant manner, that everything in the units are being assessed and assessed properly, that courses are going for a long enough period of time. Okay, so that all relates to standard 1. Okay, and certainly I recommend that you look up the standards for RTOs 2015 and read through the standards in detail. Okay, it's quite eye-opening when you get to know the standards, and the more that you're dealing with compliance, the more that you will get to know the standards. Okay, standard 2. The operations of the RTO are quality assured. So what that means is that validations are happening, that there's systems in place for continuous improvement, that training is being monitored, assessment is being monitored, okay? Standard 3, okay? So this is about the issuing of qualifications and making sure that the certificates are done in a particular way, they're done in a particular format, and all of that. Okay, standard 4 is about marketing. Okay, so let's just go back. Standard 4 is marketing. Okay, and that is about making sure that, for example, your TAS and what's on your website is mirroring each other, and you've got accuracy in your website, accuracy on your social media marketing, and everything in your pamphlets and your information's going out in emails, everything is accurate and not misleading in any way, shape or form. Also that learners are informed about the course and all of that before they actually enroll. Okay. Next, standard 5, each learner is properly informed and protected. Okay, learners' rights and consumer protection. And they know what course they're enrolling in, they know their obligations, those kind of things. Okay, standard 6 is about complaints and appeals. So if a student complains, what's the policy around that? How do you handle that? Standard 7, the RTO has effective governance and administration arrangements in place. Okay, so financial viability of the RTO. All right, so is cash flow solid? Does it have enough money in the bank if people required refunds? All those kind of things. In order to start an RTO, you need to show a good financial track record. Okay. Standard 8, the RTO cooperates with the regulator and is legally compliant at all times. Okay. And there's certainly a number of subsection items to every one of these standards. Okay. So let me ask you a couple of questions, okay? If the complaints policy wasn't well set up, what standard would that be in breach of, okay? Probably that's going to be in breach of number 6 here, okay? If a course was not going for a long enough period of time, what standard would that be in breach of? Okay, standard 1, okay? If a student was not given the terms and conditions of their course, okay, what standard would that relate to? Okay, so that would be in breach of standard 5. Okay, let's say the RTO refuses to allow the vet regulator on site, even though that they have been told that there was an audit coming up. What would that be in breach of? Standard 8. Okay. Let's go next one. Validations are not taking place. Validations are not taking place. What standard would that be in breach of? Well, probably standard 2 and possibly standard 1 there as well. Okay. Let's go one more. Final one. The knowledge evidence from a unit is not being assessed properly. What would that be in breach of? I'm going to say standard 1, okay? Let's see, one final one just for the hell of it, and let's say student files are not being kept in an appropriate fashion. What standard would that relate to? Yep, standard 3, okay, standard 3. Okay. If you ever get the opportunity to read through an audit report, it can be very fascinating as to what kind of things are picked up as a non-compliance. And as you work more and more in compliance, and even in assessing and assessment design, you'll really get a sense of how the industry comes together for compliance, the expectations and standards that must be met. Okay, so that's enough about standards. Read in your own leisure and also read in your own relevance and necessity. Okay, but everything must meet the standards, and that is our place that we always come back to. Okay, so standards for RTOs 2015, that's the link that you can use to get to it. Okay, let me just see if I can open it up. Let me see if I can open it up. Alrighty, so here is actually a copy of the standards. All right, so if you scroll down, you can see there's a bit of a table of contents there. A bit of a preamble. Okay. So here we've got standard 1, okay, and then you've got a bit of an explanation, the context there, and then you've got some substandards as well. Well, they're not really substandards, but they're just an expansion on the standard itself. Okay, so for example, the RTO has facilities, whether physical or virtual, and equipment to accommodate and support the number of learners undertaking the training and assessment. Okay, industry relevance. Okay, as I said, there's 8 standards. So all of these items relate to those 8 standards. So we've got standard 2, the operations, the RTO, quality assurance. Okay, so you can read through that in your own time. And if you want to Google it, all you need to do is just Google standards for RTO operations 2015. Alrighty, so vet legislation. All right, there's a number of legislations that impact the vet sector. So, for example, we've got the National Vocational Education Training Regulator Act 2011, the Disability Discrimination Act, Privacy Act, Racial Discrimination, Radical Discrimination Act, that should be racial, Australian Consumer Law, Sex Discrimination Act. All of these legislations will impact training assessment, how it's done, and the learner's well-being. Okay, so it is important to be aware of those. And anytime you need to write down, like in documents, legislation, definitely come back to this because it's a great list to come to. Okay, legislation regulations. Here's some more: fit and proper personal requirements, financial viability risk assessment requirements, data provision, AQF, National Vet Regulator Act. Okay. So just to remind you, ASQA, I haven't actually said it, but ASQA haven't written the standards. They don't write the standards. They only enforce the standards. Okay, the standards were actually written by the government, and ASQA's job is to just enforce the standards. Okay, so record keeping in vet. Just briefly, there's a lot of things to know about record keeping, but the fundamentals to know are that assessments and records of qualifications issued need to be kept for 30 years. Okay. Paper copy and student actual assessments need to be kept for 6 months. Okay. So when a student submits an assessment, you need to keep that for 6 months. After 6 months, you can then get rid of it, however you choose to do that. However, it's a good idea to keep it. However, records of who received qualifications, that needs to be kept for 30 years. Okay. Now, we need to keep records on planning, resources, training methods, assessment and grading, learner information, and certainly ideas. Ideas in relation to continuous improvement for sure. Okay, learner information could be things like enrollment forms, language literacy and numeracy tests, things like that. Assessment and grading would be things like assessment results, training methods, how people were assessed, and the different session plans, things like that. Okay. So RTO auditing, I'll quickly, briefly touch on this. However, this is something you would learn more and more about when you go into the compliance world. So what is covered in an audit? And, you know, as a trainer assessor, what are your requirements? Not much. Basically, the only requirement is do your assessments well and keep good records and always sign what needs to be signed, okay? And make good quality assessment judgments. Because how an RTO does in an audit comes back to the efficiency of the assessment and also the accuracy of how, so the accuracy of paperwork that's been done by the compliance department. Okay, so what's covered in an audit? Well, basically, the auditor will look through training assessment strategies and materials. They'll look through your training resources, staff and student records. They'll definitely look through every aspect of the RTO operation to see how it measures up to the standards, the 8 standards that we've got there. So how it would normally work is that they will have a list of the standards in front of them, and they will show you, they will say, show me evidence of this, and this, and you'll need to be able to provide that evidence. You'll need to be able to demonstrate that you're delivering training to industry standards, that you're meeting learner needs, and that you are continually developing your information, your systems, and your procedures and how you're doing things. Okay. Reasonable adjustment. It's a key term that you need to be aware of, and basically it just means modifying the learning or assessment process to cater for learning challenges or learning difficulties. So for example, if somebody can't read or write, then it would be unfair of the assessor to give them a written test. Okay. In that case, we would probably provide a scribe, or we'd probably provide a opportunity for them to do it verbally. Okay. If somebody had a physical difficulty, like they were in a wheelchair, then obviously we would provide a ramp for them to access the classroom, and maybe if they had concentration difficulties, maybe we would give them extra time for the assessment. Okay, those kind of things. But we can never ever jeopardize the assessment conditions of the unit. Okay, so for example, with CPR, you used to be able to say to a learner, if they had a bad back, then they could put the mannequin on a table. However, now you cannot do that, because in the unit of competency it actually says that the mannequin must be on the ground. Okay, so it's okay to make adjustments to the assessment if it's reasonable. However, you must never ever jeopardize the conditions of the unit or be done in a way that would be completely unrealistic in the workplace. Okay. Now, the word to be familiar with is contextualization, and this is just a word that you're going to hear, and it relates to making the learning content relevant and relatable for your audience. What does that mean? Well, if you were teaching a class or a group of Telstra students, then obviously you're going to use a lot of Telstra examples, okay? If you were teaching a group of, let's say, surf lifesavers about business, then obviously you're going to talk to them about business templates that they would use, or complaints, or let's say organising meetings in a surf lifesaving club. Okay, so you're going to make it as relatable as possible for them, and the more contextualized it is, the better. Okay, because that's how you're going to hook and engage your audience. Okay. So contextualization is putting language and items into a meaningful and real context rather than being treated as isolated items of language for language manipulation practice only. Contextualizing language tries to give real communicative value to the language that learners meet. Okay? In short, it means providing examples that they can relate to and role plays, scenarios, practical tasks that would really relate to their future workplace or their current workplace. Okay? So, working safely, duty of care, stay safe. Do the safety inspections before you deliver your training, before you deliver your assessment. It's really critical that you understand your obligations for due diligence, and also that you know that you've got to fill out a hazard checklist. You've got to know that your learners' safety is your responsibility. Okay. Legislation and policies, we've sort of talked about that a little bit, but don't forget copyright. That's another issue to think about. Legislation, definitely there's not, like you want to make sure that you respect and adhere to any legislation within your industry, because when you're teaching and training, you are certainly teaching the learners the legislation for that topic area as well. So, for example, in a unit such as responsible service of alcohol, that really impinges on legislation quite a bit, and students need to be aware of the laws that they need to be meeting, okay, or following. Hazards and risks, make sure that you identify them, always be on the lookout for them, and that really comes back to your safety management, your safety plan. Okay, so what's next? As I said, always feel free to reach out and join the TAE graduate group. Even if you haven't graduated, you're able to go in there, ask questions, send a message to your trainer and get extra assistance and support for sure. Also, the Advanced Trainer Bootcamp. If you're interested in taking your delivery skills to the next level, let us know and we'll tell you the dates of when the next one is happening. So, thank you so much for your time, energy and focus, and we will see you on the next webinar for the Design Cluster.